Hey guys, Will from Boosted Media here. So with the release of the new mBooster Active Pedal, MOZA have asked us to put together a settings guide for you guys to help you get the most out of this new product. Now, as hopefully you guys are aware, any kind of product like this, the settings are going to be very subjective. What one person likes could be quite different from what somebody else likes, and there isn't necessarily a right and a wrong answer when it comes to this stuff. So what I'm going to do in today's video is take you through the way I've set up the pedal, the reasons why I've set it up the way I have, but more importantly, take you through what all the settings actually do so that you're better equipped to fine tune things and get the best experience for your personal preference out of the mBooster. So without further ado, let's jump in and take you through all the settings. So once you've unboxed your pedal or pedals and got them installed on your rig, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you're running the latest version of the Pit House software. So we're going to click on the little person here, second up from the bottom. Now, just make sure you are paying attention to the MOZA Discord server. They're doing a really good job there of keeping people updated with the latest announcements. You may need to do a couple of things to make sure you're actually getting the latest version of the Pit House software intended for this particular product. So don't just assume that clicking on check for updates will give you the latest version. Check the Discord server to make sure that you are in fact getting the latest version. So once that's all covered and you are running the latest version, you're going to want to click on the little cloud button here. This is going to allow you to update the firmware on all of your devices. Now, just one quick note on firmware here. It is possible that in the future, a firmware update may completely change fundamentally how the product works. So I can't guarantee that the settings that I'm going to give you in today's video will remain a good experience for the lifetime of the product. So I would recommend watch this video through in its entirety today. Make sure you understand all the things that we're covering with regards to what the settings actually do. That way, if things do change in the future, you'll be better equipped to adjust your settings accordingly to make sure you're still getting the best experience. So they now have a new firmware manager. All you need to do is just click on firmware manager here, bring the window across, and you can actually select the firmware that you want for each of the devices that is connected to your rig. Simple as that. So what we're going to do once all that is done is click on the pedal tab here, fourth down from the top. And this is where you're going to find all the settings for your pedals. Now, what we have done is supply MOZA with the baseline JSON file for our profile. So I'm not sure how they'll make that available for download, but I'm assuming it'll probably be a link in the description box down below. The first thing you're going to want to do here once you've updated your firmware is complete the motor calibration and pedal travel calibration. I'm not going to run through these now in the interest of keeping this video as short as possible. It is all self-explanatory. It just takes you through a prompt and basically a wizard to do all the steps necessary for that. So up the top here, you've got a mBooster brake tab, and on the right-hand side, you've got a mechanical pedal tab. If you are running MOZA pedals, say CRP2 pedals, for example, for your clutch and your throttle pedal, you can adjust all the settings relating to those here. That is not a topic for today's video. You can adjust your top and bottom dead zones here. You can set a non-linear response curve if you want to as well for your throttle or your clutch. But what we're interested in for today's video is the mBooster brake tab here. So on the left-hand side here, you've got your pre-baked presets, and you can also load our presets if you've downloaded it already from here as well. So you just click on load preset, select the JSON file, hit open, and you will be good to go. You can also create presets for different vehicles here as well, and then chop and change between them to your heart's content. Now, over on the right-hand side here, we have all the settings relating to the actual feel and the effects of the pedal. So there's essentially two key features with the mBoost pedal: the ability to adapt how the pedal actually feels mechanically under your foot, and then the ability to generate effects based on telemetry data coming out of your game. So you've got a tab for pedal feel, obviously how the pedal feels underfoot. You've then got simulator input mapping, which is how the physical input on the pedal is actually mapped inside the sim. And then you've got your effects on top of that as well. Over on the left-hand side here, we have a little tab for selecting between brake, clutch, and throttle modes. We're going to focus primarily on brake for today's video, but I will give you a quick run through clutch and throttle as well. So let's start off with pedal feel here. So we've got an adjustment area here for our mechanical response, not to be confused with the input mapping. So this one here under input mapping is how the physical movement of the pedal is actually mapped inside the game. And this one is how the pedal actually feels underfoot. So let's start off here. Now you've got a preload adjustment here that you can see I've got set to 6 kilograms. That means that you do require just a little bit of force on the pedal to get it moving initially. If you have a habit like I do of resting your foot on the brake pedal, this can be quite useful, and that is adjustable between 0 kilograms of preload and 40 kilograms of preload. So at 40 kilograms, you are going to require more force into the pedal to get it moving initially. I'm going to wind that back to 6 kilograms. or thereabouts for now. Over on the right-hand side, we have the adjustment for the amount of force required to get to full scale deflection, or as far as you can physically push down the pedal. Now, this is going to be a function of how strong you are, as well as how you like the pedal to actually feel underfoot. Underneath that, we've got a pedal travel adjustment as well. And you can see this has 2 nodes. So the first node is the starting point. So if you want to adjust the pedal angle, you can see here on the pedal camera, as I move that, the pedal is going to physically move its position. Now, we can't actually make use of the full scale of movement here. So you can see when we've got that set to 0 or upright, we are limited in how far we can drag that. If we adjust the starting point up, we can then adjust this guy as well. So you can see moving this guy up allows us to go a little bit further, up to a certain point at least. It is blocked off here at the very end. I'm not sure exactly what the reason is for that, because the previous firmware version didn't do that, but chances are your firmware version will be a little bit different as well. So I like to start in the upright position and physically adjust my pedals on the rig to be in the angle that I like them. And then I chose to have this at around about the 16mm mark of travel, but this is going to be purely subjective. So obviously the more you drag this slider up, the more movement you're going to have. So you can see here at 16mm of travel, I have 16mm of movement in the pedal before it hits the soft bump stop at the end. If I drag that up, you can see now I can push that pedal a lot further. So it's purely just going to depend on exactly how you like that pedal to feel underfoot. For me, I feel like 16-ish millimeters is a good baseline for driving all kinds of different styles of cars. So whether you're driving F1 or GTs or even street cars, that's going to have you covered. Now, there's 2 schools of thought here. Some people are going to want to just adjust the pedal completely to match the type of car they're driving. For me, because I know how important muscle memory is, I don't actually like to adjust the pedal feel too much, depending on what I'm doing, simply because I don't want to have to reset my muscle memory every time I jump into a different style of car. So I feel like this is a good baseline that's going to have you covered for the vast majority of different style cars that you might be driving. So then with our response curve here, what we're doing is we're setting a bit of a kick here, as you can see towards the end, and that is going to simulate a threshold point within the throw of the brake pedal. So what we're going to try to achieve here for most simulators is to have a threshold point at around the 80% brake pressure mark. And what that's going to allow us to do is hit 80% brake pressure consistently and then modulate around that depending on what we're wanting to do. So if you look at the brake trace from a professional sim racer or even a real life race driver, you'll notice that very rarely are they actually braking to absolute 100% braking pressure. Usually it's going to be around that 80% mark, and then they're modulating their brake input around that mark and trail braking off as they start to put some steering angle in as well. So when you're braking or accelerating, obviously there's a certain amount of grip that the tire has available before it breaks traction and starts either sliding if you're braking or wheel spinning if you're accelerating. As you start to add steering angle on top of that as well, you're asking more of the tire. So what you need to do is start to trail off the brake input as you start to add steering angle so that you're maintaining that tire at the maximum level of grip available. And that's called the traction circle. There's a lot of information about traction circle available out there. You can do your own research on that, but that's a really important fundamental to sim racing and race driving. As you add more steering angle, you can almost imagine a piece of string connected between your steering wheel and your brake pedal. And as you start to turn the steering wheel, it starts to pull the pedal towards you in a linear fashion. So the more angle you're adding to the steering wheel, the less brake input you're able to give to maintain right on the edge of that traction circle. So that is fundamentally what trail braking is all about. And what we're able to do with this little kick here at the end is to establish a mechanical threshold point in the pedal that you can hit consistently at around that 80% brake pressure mark. So you can see every time I push the pedal, I am landing at around that 80% mark. I'm cheating a little bit here because I'm looking at the screen, but you get the point here. And then if I want to go to 100% brake input, I can push a little bit harder. Now, there are some sim racing titles out there like ACC, for example, where a lot of people prefer to just mash the brake pedal to 100% and then trail off from there. So it is going to depend on a couple of variables like that. If you were wanting to just mash to 100% every time, you would probably just want to go for a linear response curve like this. And then rather than feeling that increase in pressure at around 80%, instead, you're just feeling the hard stop when you get to 100% brake input. And it's as simple as that. But let's load our baseline preset again quickly now and back to that little kick. So to actually get this into the right zone for you and your physical leg strength, you are going to need to make a couple of little tweaks here. So if you're the kind of person that skips leg day, you may find that it's way too stiff for you to even reach this point in the first place. If you're somebody that's working out regularly or doing cycling or something like that, you may well just find that you push straight past that and not even notice that threshold point. So what I would recommend is get your curve looking something like this, and then adjust the maximum strength over on the right-hand side here to compensate for your leg strength. So if you're finding that it's too hard to reach that threshold point, you can wind this down, and then it won't require as much effort to reach that threshold. Conversely, if you're a lot stronger, then you can wind this all the way up to 200 kilos if you want to. And now even I'm having trouble getting to that point. I really have to get into it. You can see the amount of force that's physically required to reach that threshold here. So I'm pushing 100 kilograms of force to reach that 80% threshold. And then I'm having to put a lot more than that to go higher. But for me, 80 kilograms is about right. There is an adjustment for the sensitivity of the load cell as well, which ties into this, which we'll look at a little bit later as well. So I'm going to wind this back down to 80 kilograms. And then actually, let's have a look at that load cell adjustment now. So if we go back across to simulator input mapping, you can see maximum threshold for pressure sensors. So I've got that set to 80 kilograms as well. And what that means is that at 80 kilograms of physical force on the pedal face, we are reaching 100% input. So you'll notice here, if we go back to pedal feel, to get to that 80% threshold that we were talking about, I'm putting in 55, 56 kilograms of force. To reach 100%, it's requiring about 80 kilograms. And of course, you can push past that because the load cell is actually rated for a lot higher than that, but 100% should be at that 80 kilogram mark because of the threshold that we have set here. So just like what we saw with the pedal feel adjustment, if we wind this up to say 200 kilograms, we're now gonna have to push a lot harder to get that up to that 100% mark. And like, I physically can't even push it hard enough to like 140 kilograms, 150. I'm about to break my seat here. So yeah, if you're really, really, really strong, you might want to go up that high, but most people are probably going to be under the 100 kilogram mark. It is purely just going to depend on how physically strong you are, but I'm going to go ahead and set this back to 80 kilograms. Now you also have an adjustment here for sensor output ratio. So these pedals have a dual load cell underneath the pedal face, and that is to allow for an average between the top and the bottom of the pedal face. So you're not getting any sort of variance in the amount of brake pressure measured depending on whereabouts you push on the pedal pad. But there's also an angle sensor in this pedal as well. Now what I would recommend is have a play around with this. The right setting here is going to depend on how you have some of your effects set. If you're liking really, really strong effects that bounce the pedal around under your foot and vibrate a lot, you may find that that starts to have a little bit of an impact on the pressure detected by the load cell. So in that case, you may want to wind more towards just using the angle sensor. Look, fundamentally in terms of the actual driving, it doesn't make a huge difference. For me, I found having a split 50-50 between load cell and angle sensor worked well for me, but adjusting this doesn't really have a huge impact on the overall driving experience. So I would recommend, just now you understand what this does, have a little play around with it and see exactly what it does for you. Now the pedal mapping curve, look, honestly, I just ended up leaving this linear at all times. If you are running a really aggressive curve here, you may need to make some tweaks here just by dragging these around to make sure that you're getting a linear response inside your sim that matches the physical response of the pedal. But in most cases, at least for a brake pedal, you're probably going to want to leave this set to linear. At least that's my recommendation. So just to quickly reiterate here, we've got our preload adjustment here on the left-hand side, which is the amount of force required to get the pedal moving initially. We've got the maximum force adjustment here over on the right-hand side, which is how much force is physically required to get the pedal to 100% of its physical movement, not to be confused with the load cell sensitivity setting that we just looked at under simulator input mapping. We've got our curve here, which we can adjust to our heart's content by dragging the nodes around, or we can choose from these presets up the top here as well. And as I mentioned before, if you do want to set up different curves for different types of cars or different sims, you can save presets for those and then load them depending on the car that you're driving. So then down below that, we've got a couple of additional adjustments as well. So we've got natural damping, which you can see the tooltip that says simulate a damping force that is independent of the game output. So what this is going to allow you to do if you switch it on is just smoothen things out a little bit more, make things feel a little bit smoother overall. So what I find is that this can make the pedal feel a little bit more hydraulic. It actually feels a lot like a mechanical damper being physically attached to the pedal. So you might like the feeling of that. Personally, I prefer to have a more raw input, so I actually ended up leaving this turned off after experimenting with quite a bit, but it does make the pedal feel noticeably smoother having this wound up a little bit. So you can definitely play around with that. You're probably gonna wanna have the damping when released lower than you'll have it on the input, simply because you don't wanna add any lift off lag. You can see, or you might not actually be able to see, but if we wind that all the way up, it does actually make the pedal a little bit slow to bounce back under your foot, which can make modulating your inputs a little bit laggy. And you can see there, as I lift my foot off, there is actually a little bit of disconnect. You can see my foot is actually coming away from the pedal. If I wind that all the way back down again, you can see the pedal follows my foot a lot more quickly. So yeah, I would recommend running a relatively low setting on this, just to make sure you're not getting any sort of lag there at all. But yeah, that is purely just going to be a personal preference thing, as long as you're not getting any input lag. I'm going to leave that turned off for now. Natural friction, this just adds a little bit of additional friction to the input of the pedal. So again, you can fine tune this to your heart's content. It doesn't have a huge impact on the overall feeling, simply because you are going to have natural friction relative to the curve that you have set here as well. So I just leave that guy turned off too. And then finally in this section, we've got our end stop feeling. So we've got an adjustment for front limit and end limit. I would recommend having the end limit cranked up to the maximum, just so that when you are reaching that 100% point, you are feeling a physical stop in the pedal. You're probably not going to be hitting that very often anyway, unless you're doing ACC, of course. You don't really want to have a scenario where you're reaching 100% input and not feeling a mechanical stop, because then it just kind of becomes a little bit disconnected. So I'd recommend having that wound all the way up. Now the front limiter is a little bit strange. I can't actually physically feel any difference when I wind this up and down. I'm assuming it's something related to when the pedal reaches its 0 position, but even if I artificially adjust where that 0 position is, so it's not mechanically all the way back, I still don't feel any difference in the pedal when I adjust this. So yeah, I can't really guide you on that one. Have a play around with it and see if you feel anything, but yeah, that is my take on that guy. And that is everything related to pedal feeling and simulated input mapping. So now on top of that, as we mentioned earlier, we have our effects as well, which are the telemetry based effects that you feel through the physical pedal. So in the context of a brake pedal, my school of thought is always less is more when it comes to this kind of stuff. You only want to be feeling the things that actually are going to be conducive to driving more quickly and consistently. You don't want to be overwhelming your senses with a bunch of information that isn't actually helping you achieve that goal. So for that reason, I like to have engine vibration turned off on a brake pedal. If you were configuring this as a throttle or a clutch, you may want to do something a little bit different here, but we'll cover those in just a moment. But with our engine vibration, ABS, and traction control, you can see we've got an adjustment for each of these for both frequency and intensity. So frequency is just how quickly it pulses, or the frequency of the pulses, and intensity is like the amplitude or the volume or gain level, or how intense that's going to be when it kicks in. So if we click on the test button for ABS here, that's going to give us a nice little simulation of how that's going to feel underfoot. So you can see when I push that down, the pedal is pulsing at 10 Hertz or 10 pulses per second. We can increase that all the way up to 30 Hertz if we want to, or all the way down to 5 Hertz. Now, when you go to 5 Hertz, you can see we start to get a bit of a bouncy line here in our pedal response, and that will actually have an impact on the braking performance inside the game. So you can see as the pedal's moving, obviously our actual brake input inside the game is going to vary as well. So I would recommend don't go any lower than about 10 Hertz, and just try to simulate the sensation of ABS inside a real car. What the pedal's doing is it isn't actually, taking a physical telemetry-based position of the pedal from the game. All it's doing is detecting when ABS is triggered inside the game and then generating this effect based on the settings that you have here. So you can adjust your frequency and your intensity to your heart's content. What I recommend, again, just have this wound up enough that you feel when ABS is kicking in, but not so much that it's going to actually have an impact on your input, but it is purely subjective beyond that. We also do have a adjustment here for smoothness as well. So if you want to adjust how smooth that effect feels, you can do that as well. Let's switch off the test for this. Now you can see I've also got traction control switched off. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have traction control effect on a brake pedal, because you're not going to be hitting traction control when you're braking anyway. And then we also have a couple of additional effects here as well, which are quite interesting. So we've got a brake threshold vibration. Now this is basically in lieu of a physical lockup. And there is a chart available on the MOZA website that will tell you which sims are compatible with which effects. They're not all compatible with every effect, simply because of the limitations in what telemetry data is outputted by some of the different games. So the difference between the brake threshold vibration and the wheel lockup effect is that the brake threshold vibration is just an effect that's going to trigger when you reach a certain physical threshold on the pedal. So if we trigger this guy, make sure everything else is turned off. If our trigger input level is 80%, that means that every time we hit 80% input on our pedal, we're going to feel that vibration at the frequency and intensity that we set, exactly like what we saw with the ABS and traction control just before. Now, in contrast to that, if we use the wheel lockup effect, what this is gonna do is actually detect when the wheels are locking up inside the sim and only trigger that effect when that is actually happening. So this is obviously gonna be the preferable one, provided that the sim title that you're using actually supports it. So if it doesn't, you may want to use the brake threshold vibration just to sort of help you set that muscle memory. And it's actually quite interesting to set this on, set it to that 80% mark, and then try to consistently push the pedal to that mark without hitting that vibration. It's actually quite a good little training exercise to allow you to establish that muscle memory around that threshold point that we were discussing earlier. So you've got your trigger level, which is simply just the braking input percentage where you want this to trigger. You've got your frequency, your intensity, and then also decay as well. So what you can do here is adjust how quickly the vibration kicks in and stops again, so that you've got a little bit of hysteresis on either side. It's not just on, off, on, off, on, off constantly if you're modulating your brake input. So if you wind that up, it's going to take a little bit longer to kick in, a little bit longer to disengage again afterwards. But I found around that sort of 20–30% was pretty good for me. For wheel lockup, it is going to be a purely subjective thing. You can just adjust the frequency and the intensity just like what we saw before to feel exactly how you want it every time you lock up your wheel. So for most scenarios, provided that that wheel lockup effect is available, I like to run everything turned off on a brake pedal except for ABS if you're driving a car that has ABS, or wheel lockup if you're driving a car that doesn't have ABS. So what I would recommend is keep ABS switched on and wheel lock switched on. If you're running a sim that doesn't support wheel lockup, then you may want to enable that brake threshold vibration. Now you might be wondering, why would you want to have wheel lockup and ABS? Now, it's important to understand that in a race car, ABS doesn't work exactly the same as it does in a street car. In a street car, ABS is intended to basically just kick in anytime there's any level of under rotation in any of the tires at all. And it's designed that way to ensure that inexperienced drivers are able to maintain control of the vehicle to the best of their ability, at least under all kinds of scenarios. Now, in a race car, you typically will have an adjustment for the ABS level. And what that allows is slight under rotation of the tires. Tires will actually produce the most grip when they are just slightly under rotating, but not completely sliding across the track surface. So that is the reason why you may still want to have a little bit of lockup here just to feel where that under rotation is occurring, because the ABS isn't necessarily going to allow you to absolutely optimally brake into every single corner. So that is the reason why I would recommend running both of those for those who weren't aware of how ABS works in a real life race car. And of course, it will depend on the car that you're driving. Not every single car is going to work that way, but if you do have an ABS adjustment inside the race car you're driving, likely that is the reason why you have that adjustment. And that is everything I think you need to know in terms of setting one of these pedals up as a brake. Let's just quickly talk about usage as a throttle and a clutch as well. Now, this is an area that MOZA are still actively working on. They are releasing updates quite frequently. When we first got our hands on the pedal, there were quite a few problems here. Thankfully, they have improved the feeling quite a bit here, but there is still a little bit of work to be done. So definitely will be interesting to see how things progress there. So look, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it works pretty much exactly the same way. We've got all the same adjustments here. Obviously, the way you actually want to physically set this up will be different for a throttle or a clutch to what it would be for a brake. So if you're wanting to use it as a clutch, for example, you might want to set up a curve that looks something like this. So you can see, or you might not actually be able to see on camera, but as I push the pedal down, I get to a point here where it starts to sort of want to roll over. So we've got an initial quite a large amount of force that's required, and then it tapers off once we get to that friction point. And you may want to adjust your input mapping here so that it matches that input curve, so that when you're feeling that rollover point, you're actually getting whatever the clutch bite point is for the particular car that you're driving. So again, it is purely just going to be down to subjective preference here, depending on how you like your clutch to feel, but you can make this feel like anything you want. You can have it nice and linear, like what we have here. You can have an S curve, you can have a curve that looks more like, you get the idea. You can fine tune this and you can just move the nodes around, just like what we saw before. You can set your maximum force required and your preload here as well, just like what we saw with the brake. And you can, of course, adjust your pedal travel, your damping, your end stop feel, your friction, and all those important things. Exactly the same with the throttle pedal as well. So what I recommend here is just fiddle around with it, just fine tune it. You understand what all these settings do now. So I think you're in a good position to fine tune this to your own personal preference. So if you do have any questions, what I would recommend is jump into the MOZA Discord. There you'll find a good community of people that are able to help with any questions that you might have. Good technical support through there as well. You can, as I said before, download the settings that I've recommended here if you just want to use that as a baseline. I have tried to configure this all to be as, as universal as I possibly can. But of course, everybody is going to have their subjective preferences, and the type of car that you're driving may have a big impact on what you're doing here as well. But what I wouldn't recommend is, having a huge variance in how the pedal feels underneath your foot, depending on what car you're driving, because that will make it more difficult to maintain muscle memory when you're jumping in and out of different styles of cars. So having some sort of a hybrid setup that's going to suit the largest scale of different cars possible is probably going to be the best thing. But yeah, hopefully that helps you out, guys. If it has, leave a thumbs up on the video, and yeah, we'll see you again soon. Bye.